With 7 quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities still to go, Gonzaga has full control over their destiny the rest of the season. What do they need to do to right the ship?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, Gonzaga is out of the top 25. We're going to talk about that, but Zags also still top 20 in the net. So we're going to break down Gonzaga's remaining schedule, which includes 7 games in the quad 1 and quad 2, talk about what they need to do to stay in the picture for the WCC championship, to stay in the picture for the NCAA tournament, and to stay in the picture to get themselves a seed where they can make and continue that Sweet 16 run. And then we're going to close out the show talking about what Gonzaga specifically needs to do. They got a lot of games they need to win. They don't have as much wiggle room as they typically do. So what are the adjustments, the changes, the mixing and matchings of lineups, various things that Mark Few and the coaching staff and the players can do between now and early March to get this team in a position where they are comfortable going into Selection Sunday and into the NCAA tournament. So we'll get to all those adjustments and stuff later in the show, but we start with the unsurprising but still sad news: Gonzaga out of the AP Top 25. I'll be honest, this doesn't really concern me all that much. Last year when Gonzaga fell out of the top 25, it was a bigger deal because it broke what I believe was like a 10 to 11 year streak of continually being in the top 25. It was a very, very lengthy streak, a tremendous accomplishment. And now it just doesn't matter that much. The AP poll doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything. The voters do not utilize this to impact Selection Sunday. I mean, I say it doesn't matter. Like, obviously there's a perception thing, and there, you know, when you watch the games and you see the number next to their team, like there are things, brand awareness, stuff like that. But for Gonzaga at this point, being ranked meant a lot to Gonzaga in 2004, 2009, even 2013. It was more important than it is now. Gonzaga is so well established as a brand, so well established as a part of college basketball's lexicon that the AP ranking is just not super significant. Would love for them to get back. Not even because I want them to get back into the AP poll, but them getting back would happen if they beat Oregon State next week, if they beat St. Mary's on February 1st. If they win those games, that's what's going to get them back in the top 25 and not losing any more games. So, of course, I want them to be ranked again, but it's not the actual number next to their name that really concerns me all that much. The Zags picked up 34 votes still, so they're 29th technically. Texas Tech was the top top team receiving votes that did not make the top 25. Utah State was next. Vanderbilt 1 vote more than Gonzaga. St. Mary's picked up 12 votes. St. Mary's resume is not as good as Gonzaga's right now, but it is surprising, considering how well they have played, that they picked up 12 votes compared to Gonzaga's 34, when I think anybody watching the WCC would consider St. Mary's the better team right now, but St. Mary's has a couple of quad 2 losses, which Gonzaga does not have. Regardless, we will see how those numbers shift as the rest of the season goes on. But I don't want to focus on the AP voting here, because I want to focus on the metric that matters more, which is the net. The net is used by the Selection Sunday committee. It is a stat or a metric that is valued significantly with regards to, first of all, making the NCAA tournament if Gonzaga does not win the WCC tournament and needs to get an at-large bid. It also matters in terms of seeding, where you get placed in the NCAA tournament. And Gonzaga is still a top 20 team in the net. As I'm recording this right now, Monday evening, they are 19th. It adjusts on a daily basis, so it will potentially fluctuate on Tuesday by the time you're listening to this, although granted, very few games on Monday, so probably not a lot of movement in the net rankings. Gonzaga has a 2-5 record in quad 1 games, their wins being Baylor and San Diego State, their losses being West Virginia, Kentucky, UConn, UCLA, and most recently the loss to Oregon State in Corvallis. From a quad 2 perspective, Gonzaga now has a quad 2 loss, which does damper the resume, as their loss to Santa Clara goes in the quad 2. Their wins, Arizona State and Indiana. They are 4-0 quad 3, 6-0 in quad 4. Washington State, Davidson, Pepperdine, LMU being the quad 3 games, and then the rest of their schedule being in the quad 4. Washington State, previously a quad 2 game. We talked about it last week. They were 74th or 75th in the net. They needed to stay in the top 75. They have fallen a few spots. They're going to probably fluctuate between quad 1 and quad 2 for that game that Gonzaga has already beat Washington State. So don't be surprised if that ends up climbing back, fluctuating between quad 2 and quad 3. Gonzaga will play Washington State on the road later this year, and that game may fluctuate between quad 1 and quad 2 for the Zags as well. In terms of things that could change for Gonzaga, we mentioned this last week with Baylor. Baylor was 20th in the net last week. They need to stay top 30 for it to count as a quad 1 win for Gonzaga, because Baylor, that game is considered a home game for Gonzaga, played at the Spokane Arena. For the net purposes, it's a home game. So Baylor, in order to stay quad 1, has to be top 30. They were 20th last week. They lost on Sunday at home to TCU. And now Baylor's 28th, narrowly hanging on to a quad 1 spot for Gonzaga's resume. If Baylor were to drop below 30, that would drop them to a quad 2 win for Gonzaga, which would mean Gonzaga would only have the one quad 1 win, currently the road game over San Diego State. San Diego State is 45th in the net right now. They have to remain top 75, as that was a road win for Gonzaga. So feel pretty confident San Diego State's not going to drop 30 spots in the net, so they should continue to hold on to that game. I think Baylor ultimately by the end of the year remains a quad 1 game. It's possible they'll drop if they lose any other games. The Big 12 is very tough this year, but losses don't hurt you very much in the Big 12 because of how dominant the conference is collectively, and wins help you a lot. So I wouldn't be surprised if I think Baylor will stay a quad 1 game, but yeah, it's a little tenuous looking at it right now. A couple other things that could change. Oregon State's at 60. They need to stay top 75 for that loss to stay in the quad 1 category. Indiana's 61st in the net right now. If they get into the top 50, that becomes a quad 1 win for Gonzaga. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. Rooting for the Hoosiers as they continue on in Big Ten play. What mentioned Washington State, they're 79th right now. Want them to stay top 75 for that quad 3 win to become a quad 2 win, and for the upcoming road opportunity against them to be a quad 1 game. Arizona State's at 64th. They need to remain top 75 for that home win to be to stay in the quad 2. So we want them to continue to play successfully as well. Davidson, 113th. If they move into the top 100, that quad 3 win becomes a quad 2 win. So those are some things to keep an eye on, some teams to be rooting for going forward this season to help Gonzaga's resume. Again, these small movements up and down are not huge differences for Gonzaga's resume, but every little bit helps, especially in a season like this where they're not just coasting their way to a top 3 seed as they have in many previous years. Here's the good news. The best news. Spoke about this on the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast with Zach Farmer. For those of you who missed it, it is in your feed. Fantastic show. The WCC being stronger is a big benefit to Gonzaga, because right now the Zags have 11 remaining regular season games. They'll also play at least 2 games in the WCC tournament. And right now, though, of the 11 regular season games, 7 of them are either quad 1 or quad 2, compared to just 4 that are not. This is not the WCC of 2010 or 2004 or whatever. This WCC has depth and has talent. There are still bottom feeders. Gonzaga's got one of them coming up on Saturday at the Chiles Center against Portland. That's a bad team. San Diego, bad team. Pacific Pepperdine, not very good teams. San Diego, not a good team. But this conference, by and large, is providing Gonzaga with multiple quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities. 4 of their remaining 11 games are quad 1 as of now. At St. Mary's, home against St. Mary's, at Santa Clara, and at San Francisco. San Francisco was a quad 2 game. Now it is up to the quad 1. They have 3 quad 2 games. Oregon State at home next Tuesday, San Francisco at home, and then at Washington State. And then they have 1 quad 3 game, which is LMU, and then they have the quad 4 games at Portland, at Pacific, and against Pepperdine. Some of those may fluctuate, but honestly, if a team drops from quad 2 to quad 3, it's possible that another team that Gonzaga is playing is moving up from quad 3 to quad 2. So the overall, I wouldn't be surprised if 7 of these 11 games do end up being quad 1, quad 2. Maybe it ends up being 6. Maybe it ends up being 5, which is probably the quote unquote worst case scenario, but that's still pretty good. That means the ball's in Gonzaga's court. They got multiple opportunities I mean, they're reasonably in a spot right now. Reasonably, it's not going to be easy to do, but they have 4 quad 1 games. They could pick up 6 quad 1 wins. That is something that Gonzaga could do. And again, we say it's in their control. Winning those games is inside their control. Those teams remaining quad 1 is not necessarily in their control. St. Mary's like 27. If you beat St. Mary's and they lose another game, home game may end up being quad 2. But go out and win the games you can win. Get yourself some resume boosters. That is an option that Gonzaga has because the WCC is strong enough this year that Gonzaga will face enough good teams to rebuild their resume. There's been a lot of times in years past, not super recent, but 10 years ago, 2016 season, 2014-15 season, which was kind of a slog, 2012, 2011, those seasons. In late January, if Gonzaga's resume didn't look great, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot they could do. Now, there is opportunities to pick up big wins remaining. That is a direct product of the WCC adding Oregon State and Washington State, the WCC having success with St. Mary's and Santa Clara and San Francisco, being in positions where those are quality wins for Gonzaga. That is a good thing and is potentially going to be a savior for Gonzaga going forward this year. But again, Gonzaga's got to do it. They got to do it. That's what I want to talk about. Their resume positions them for a spot in the NCAA tournament fairly comfortably. What do they need to do in these final 11 regular season games? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keep every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your winnings. So whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Tuesday night, Big Ten action, Oregon and Washington taking each other on. Ducks favored by 13.5. It's a rivalry. Anything can happen. Could be fun to see if Washington can cover that fairly significant spread in conference play. If you're interested in that, any of the other lines they got for those upcoming NFL games, some NBA games, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Reminder, you'll get started with $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we started the show talking about Gonzaga being out of the AP top 25, but still being in the top 20 in the net at 19. Talked about the resume up to this point, the quad 1 wins they have, the potential for more quad 1 wins coming up, 7 of their 11 upcoming games being in the quad 1 or quad 2. Now what I want to do is talk about Gonzaga's resume as it is, what they need to do to make sure that when Selection Sunday rolls around on March 16th, that they are feeling comfortable, that they're not sweating what's going to happen that day. The first thing, and the very obvious, easiest option, win the WCC tournament. One team from the WCC is guaranteed to make the NCAA tournament. It's whoever wins that final game in Las Vegas on Tuesday, whatever, March 11th, whatever day that it is of the week. You win that basketball game, you're in the tournament, you don't got to worry. You still want to know where you're going to get seated, sure, but you do not have to worry that your name is not going to show up on Selection Sunday. That's the easiest thing to do. Easiest way to do that, finish top 2 in the conference. If you finish first or second in the West Coast Conference regular season, you get a double bye where you do not have to play until the semifinals of the WCC tournament. You win that game, you're automatically in the championship. You win that game, you're done. 2 games, 2-0 in Las Vegas. Other teams got to go 4-0. Other teams got to win a lot more games in a short span of time to get to that spot. You finish top 2 in the league, you don't have to do any of that. That's the easiest thing. Right now, Gonzaga's not in a super comfortable position to be there, and they're always there. They're always there. It is unusual to see them in this spot. St. Mary's comfortable lead in conference play, they're 6-0. San Francisco's next at 6-2. And then you have Washington State, Santa Clara, and Gonzaga all tied at 5-2. So yes, San Francisco is technically second in sole possession of second place, but they're only a half game ahead of Wazoo and Santa Clara and Gonzaga simply because they have played one more game. So that basically means there's 4 teams kind of right in that mix. 4 2-loss teams in this league right now, with St. Mary's comfortably ahead. St. Mary's has played the bottom half of the conference. Their schedule was very favorable early on. They have a ridiculous stretch of games. I think their next like 6 or 7 games, pretty much all of them are quad 1, quad 2. Like I think all but one of them. So we're going to learn a lot about this Gales team over the next 3 weeks or so. But right now, they're comfortably 2 games ahead. It's a good spot to be in, where if you do have a lapse, if you do lose a game to Gonzaga on February 1st, or you do lose to Washington State or somebody like that, you're still in a position where you have that comfortable lead. Gonzaga's in a good spot too. Tied for 3rd place does not feel like a good spot, but they have played some of the good meat on their schedule already. They obviously have tough games left. They got 2 at St. Mary's, or 2 against St. Mary's, 1 at home, 1 on the road, 2 against San Francisco, 1 at home and 1 on the road, but at the Chase Center, where it'll be a more friendly crowd than it would be if they played at War Memorial. They got a road game against Washington State still on the docket. They got a road game against Santa Clara still on the docket. They got the home game on Tuesday against Oregon State. And again, this is the testament to the strength of the WCC, that Gonzaga's schedule isn't super favorable because there's just a lot of good teams in the conference. Gonzaga's got a good opportunity to right the ship this weekend, playing at Portland, a place that has served them as like a home away from home, with a huge crowd frequently there at the Child Center. I will be there this Saturday. Very much looking forward to that. And against a Portland team that is going to have a hard time putting up a fight. They've played some teams tough in the first half, but they're just not talented enough to really keep up with the top half of this conference. And that should bear itself out on Saturday. But after that, it's a tough sled, tough road. They got Oregon State at home, then they got St. Mary's the Saturday after that. Like, it's not going to get easier for Gonzaga, but they're in a position where if you sweep San Francisco and you split with St. Mary's, if you do that and you don't, drop a stinker to Portland, you don't drop a stinker in Stockton to Pacific, you take care of business against the quad 3 and quad 4 games, you sweep San Francisco, you take one of the games against St. Mary's, you're fine. You're going to be fine in terms of making the tournament. I'm not saying you're going to get, the sexiest seed necessarily. And if you do that and you lose it at Washington State, or you get swept by Oregon State, if you sweep San Francisco, you split with St. Mary's, you're probably going to be fine. If you struggle in those other games, maybe you get a 9 seed, and that's gross. You don't want that. Your odds of continuing the Sweet 16 streak take a massive hit if you're on the 8-9 line, where you got to play a 1 seed in the second round, but you're in the tournament. Now, the best thing Gonzaga can do is win out, obviously. Everybody knows that. Is it likely that Gonzaga wins out? Probably not. They're not playing great right now. St. Mary's is an incredibly good team. St. Mary's is a very difficult team to beat on the road. Outside of that, road game at Washington State, that's not going to be easy either. Washington State's stumbling a little bit right now. I think the lack of depth, having so many players hurt, is starting to really catch up to them, and you're seeing them kind of wear down as the season goes on. That's still not going to be an easy game. Any game in Pullman's going to be hard. That's the nature of Gonzaga now being in a conference with Washington State every single year. Oregon State is obviously a tough team, played them extremely well last time out. I like Gonzaga's odds better at home, but I said that against Santa Clara, and they did not play well at home. So obviously some work to do. Very clearly some work to do for this team. They continue to put out that level of defensive effort against Santa Clara. Yeah, we're going to have real concerns about this team making the tournament. I'm of the belief that they are going to start making some changes, start fixing some things, and put themselves in a position to be more comfortable. We're going to talk about that to close out the show. I do also want to say for Gonzaga, if they don't win the WCC tournament, stay in the top 30 in the net. Stay in the top 30 in the net. If you are in the top 30, it is very unlikely that you get passed over by the selection committee. They're 19th right now. So again, if you don't win the WCC tournament, you can't also lose a bunch of regular season games. You gotta take care of business. I maintain my stance of sweep San Francisco, split St. Mary's. You're going to be fine. You're going to be in the top 30 in the net unless you lose every other game, which is not super realistic, albeit obviously significantly problematic were that to happen. But for Gonzaga, stay in the top 30 in the net, win the games you're expected to win. Don't lose any bad games, no bad losses. You cannot take any bad losses at this point. You have very little wiggle room going forward this season, but take care of the business that you're supposed to take care of. Win a few good games, get yourself up to 4 quad 1 wins, stay in the top 25-ish, top 30 for sure of the net rankings. You're going to get in. Again, it may not be a sexy seed. You may not be back on the 5 line like they were last year, but you're going to get into the tournament. So what does Gonzaga need to do to win those games? Or more importantly, what does Gonzaga need to do to not lose those games? That's what we're going to talk about to close out the show, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, a word from PrizePicks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players. If your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. Scary Terry McLaurin, the wide receiver for Washington, 69.5 receiving yards for their playoff game against Philadelphia this Sunday. I like the over. Maybe it's because he was very generous to me in my fantasy football league this year. I like him to get over 69.5 receiving yards. If he does that and you put some money down on him, you could win lots and lots of money. It's easy. It's fun. Plus, with PrizePicks' Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the apps, you can get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, folks, segment 3, Andy Patton here, Locked On Zags podcast, still talking about Gonzaga's resume, still talking about the upcoming games. We talked about what Gonzaga's resume looks like up to this point, what could change based on how the teams that Gonzaga has already played could or are expected to do for the rest of the season. Then we talked about the 11 remaining regular season games for Gonzaga, 7 of them being of the quad 1 or quad 2 variety, how we think Gonzaga needs to do in terms of wins and losses to put themselves in a position to still make the NCAA tournament, to potentially put themselves in a position to still get a favorable seed and potentially keep that Sweet 16 streak alive. Now, I want to close up the show to talking more specifics on the actual basketball court. It's easy to look at the spreadsheets, to look at the numbers, to look at the net rankings and say Gonzaga needs to win these games, they need to lose these, or they can't lose these games. This is what they need to do. This is what Baylor needs to do, et cetera, et cetera. But what are the things that need to be fixed between the lines? What are the things that need to be fixed during the basketball game? We've talked about a few of them already. We've talked about a lot of them throughout the season that we've just been continually frustrated that they have not been corrected or adjusted in any way. But now's a good time to kind of look specifically at a few things that could need to change between now and early March for Gonzaga to be in the position they want to be in come Selection Sunday. Number one, you've got to start experimenting with different defenses. The defensive system that Gonzaga runs and has run for decades, it's not working. Partly because of personnel, partly because of predictability, partly because of just the rise of bigger guards and three-point shooting in college. There's a ton of different reasons. It doesn't really matter. It's not working. Gonzaga gave up 200 points in their last 2 games. The defense is not working. The fact that Gonzaga scored nearly 200 points in their last 2 games and lost both of them is a huge testament to how good this team could be if they had any semblance of defensive consistency, but they don't. They don't. They've gotten worse defensively as the year has gone on. Clearly, they held Baylor to 63 points. Maybe that game is a bit of an aberration, but Baylor hasn't been all that good at this point, but still. They held Baylor to 63 points. They've held many other opponents early in the season to under 60 points or under 70 points, and then now they're giving up 100 points, 103 points at home to Santa Clara, 97 points to Oregon State. Like, this is a team that is clearly not playing as well as they're capable of and not as well as they have defensively, so you have to make a change. You didn't have time to make any major adjustments between Oregon State and Santa Clara, and I'm not saying that as a justified excuse for giving up 100 points to Santa Clara, because there's not a justified excuse for that, just an acknowledgement that the things that they saw as a problem against Oregon State, they probably didn't have a lot of time to make sweeping changes to those things against Santa Clara. All that to say, now you got a week, and you're playing a team that's not going to beat you, so you can try some new things. Maybe you try a zone. Size limitations are still a problem. Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman aren't going to get taller. They're not going to get longer. But if you try a zone, zone is tough because zone is better when you're playing against a team that has good big men. Like, teams using zone against Gonzaga makes a ton of sense. We can't stop Graham Ike one-on-one. When Graham gets double teamed, he passes the ball out and they get open looks. So we're going to play a zone, force them to shoot over the top of the zone where they're a weaker team as a three-point shooting team. Every team should run zone against Gonzaga. I'm glad they all don't, but they should. For Gonzaga, running a zone doesn't necessarily work against a lot of teams where they're already capable of shooting over the zone. And if you run a zone, they're just going to get more open looks from 3. Gonzaga tried to go zone against Santa Clara. I get it. They were desperate. They had to try something. That's not really the team to do it against, and it didn't work, and they quickly corrected it. But maybe you start implementing it in practice, working on it, figuring out maybe we do a 3-2. Maybe we do a 2-1-2. Maybe we do a box and one. Like, try something different defensively than what you're currently doing, because it is not working. It is not working. The Zags are probably never going to stop hedging on picks. They're certainly not going to make it a change that dramatic in the middle of a season. It's not going to happen. So they're going to continue to hedge on picks, but maybe there are other adjustments you can make. How quickly you send a double team at a specific player, how much you come over to try to help on on one of those screens after Huff or Dusty Huff or EK hedges and Dusty's fighting over it. Like, maybe instead of sending Hickman over to try to knock the ball loose, you don't do, like, there's small micro adjustments they could make, things that I'm not even privy to being able to see, that I would like them to at least look at, anything that they think could potentially help this team from a schematic defensive perspective, because what they're doing currently, clearly not working. And we talked about this too. Part of the issue is the schemes for Gonzaga, but part of it is the personnel too. And you can't change your personnel in the middle of the season. I mean, not dramatically at least, but you can start mix and match, mix lineups, mix rotations, make a concentrated effort to have your lineups and rotations be done solely for the purpose of improving defensively, because you can sacrifice some offense. You can sacrifice some offense to make this team better defensively. Don't sacrifice offense just to sacrifice offense. Don't bring a player in who's equally bad defensively, but just worse offensively. But if you're going to make a tangible improvement on the floor defensively, you have to be willing to do that, even if it is a negative offensively. 3 players where this matters significantly: Dusty Stromer, Michael Ajayi, Emmanuel Innocenti. Dusty Stromer is the best overall player out of that group. He is a very good perimeter defensive player, the best perimeter defensive player on this Gonzaga team. He's long, he's crafty, he's good at getting around screens, he's tenacious, he plays hard on that end of the floor. He is struggling currently offensively. In the last 5 games, Dusty's averaging 5.5 points. He's averaging a steal. He's averaging the same number of assists and turnovers. He is 4 of 18, 22% from 3. He is struggling offensively over the last 5 games. But you have to play him more. You do not have a choice. I mentioned this on yesterday's episode of Locked On Zags. Part of Gonzaga's problem is how great Ryan Nembhard and now lately Nolan Hickman have been playing. Nolan Hickman, 6 threes in that game against Santa Clara. I think he had 3 threes against Oregon State. He has been red hot from 3. Ryan Nembhard, 16 points, 15 assists, and a turnover. A ridiculous game against Santa Clara. It's hard to not play those guys when it feels like their offense is the only thing keeping you in the game. The problem is their defense is killing you. And both of them are guys who work hard defensively, but they are just not big enough. They are not long enough. They are not athletic. They're athletically limited to the point where they cannot be great defenders. They just can't. They cannot do it. And as great as they are offensively, that's not going to change. So you have to make adjustments. Play Dusty more. Play Michael Ajayi more. And that's a bit controversial because he has been a negative offensively, but he is a good defensive player. He is a great rebounder. He is a good defensive player. The problem is he plays the same position as Ben Gregg, who's one of Gonzaga's better defensive players and is a significantly bigger offensive contributor. A potential solution there, play them both. Play them at the same time. We haven't seen that. I'm curious if Gonzaga will give some legitimacy to playing Michael Ajayi at the 3. And I know that there are people who are going to think that is a baffling decision, considering how Michael has looked offensively on this team. But hear me out. Gonzaga asks a lot of the power forward in their offense. The power forward comes up to the top of the key. They catch that pass from the wing. They look to make an entry pass in the high-low. They do the dribble handoff. They're asked to do the pick and pop. There is a lot of mental. There is a lot of decision-making. There is a lot asked of the power forward in Gonzaga's offense. There is less asked of the third wing in Gonzaga's offense. There's 3 players on the perimeter, Nembhard, Hickman, and usually Stromer or Battle, or usually one of those 2 guys. If you put somebody out on the wing where they are not asked to be a focal point offensively, that's a fairly easy role. The role Dusty has filled, where catch and shoot threes. Michael's not going to do that, but catch, attack, closeout, strive to the basket, or just swing the ball around. Folks, remember Mike Hart? Back from the 2013 team, started at the small forward position, would play 25, 30 minutes a night, would have 0 points on 0 of 1 shooting, 0 turnovers, but he'd have 7 rebounds, and he'd defended the other team's best player all game. Michael's going to need to work on the turnovers, but if you put him in a role where he's just catching the ball and swinging the ball around and he doesn't have to think, he doesn't have to do a whole lot, You can play him there. You can get away with playing him at the 3. I really believe that. He's not going to be a significant contributor offensively. If your focal point in terms of determining Michael Ajayi's value is looking at his points per game, it's not going to improve in that role. But if he can play significant minutes and just hound the other players, the other team's best player on the wing, get right up in their face, yeah, he might pick up some fouls. Sure, you live with that. But Caleb Battle's not doing it defensively. He's just flying off the floor and pump fakes every single time. Dusty Stromer's doing it defensively, but he had 4 fouls against Oregon State, took himself out of the game. We've talked about Nembhard and Hickman's size disadvantage. Put Ajayi at the 3. Let him be a non-factor offensively, just attack some closeouts, go in for offensive rebounds, and hound the other team defensively. I would like to see them try it. I don't think they will. Mark Few doesn't switch positions very often. He did it last year with Anton Watson and Ben Gregg, though. This is a similar thing. Maybe they'll give that a look. I'll mention Innocenti as well. I don't think there's a dramatic change there, but maybe instead of 2 minutes every once in a while, the last minute and a half of the first half and then a few minutes at the end of the game, maybe he gets like 9 minutes a game. Maybe those minutes come from Battle, who's really struggling. Maybe those minutes come from Hickman. Maybe those minutes come from Stromer if he's not continuing to deliver. Innocenti's not ready to be a focal point in this offense by any stretch. You don't need him to be. Him and Ajayi split those minutes. Again, they're not going to split all the minutes, obviously, because Battle and Stromer and those guys need to play. But I think I'd like to see more minutes on the wing for Ajayi, more minutes on the wing from Innocenti, where they're in a role where the other 4 players are the focal point offensively. You play Ben at the 4, you play either EK or Huff at the 5, you play the 2 guards at the 1 and the 2. You can afford to have a player on the floor who doesn't need the ball in their hands, like Ajayi, like Innocenti. Because when you have the 4 starters and Caleb Battle, you got too many cooks in the kitchen. We're seeing that present itself as a problem for Gonzaga offensively. So you kind of do a 2 birds, 1 stone thing here, where you're addressing an issue where you don't have as many players who need the ball, who are looking to score. You are more focused on getting the ball in the best players, offensive players' hands, like Graham and Ryan and Nolan when he's shooting well. And you have somebody on the floor whose job is to just be a dog on the other end of the floor. I would like to see Gonzaga experiment with using those 2 players in a different role like that. And Dusty as well, of course. Dusty's already used in that role, but even more than that. I would like to see some of those experimentations with some of the rotations, changing things up. Things are not working right now. It is very clear that things are not working. These are ways that Gonzaga could switch things up, change the dynamic a little bit. They're not overwhelming changes. Again, we're not asking them to stop hedging on screens and changing the way their bigs have run their defense for 25 years. But there are things they can do, things they've done in the past, like the way they used Mike in the past. They can do that with Michael this year. It is not that difficult. He's played the perimeter before. It's not a crazy ask to have him do that. People say, well, he's not contributing offensively. I don't care. I do not care. They don't need 5 players who are all great at scoring the basketball. When they play 5 players who are all good at scoring the basketball, they score 99 points and lose. I think every single one of you would take 85 points in a win. Every single one of you would take that. Mark Few would take that. This is a way that you might be able to get that done. We'll see if they make any changes against Portland on Saturday. I'm sure we'll see some changes, but I'm curious. Again, Portland's a bad litmus test. They'll go out, they beat them by 30. They go out, they beat them by 20, whatever it is. Doesn't necessarily tell us there's a dramatic shift, but I'm going to be looking for things like that. Adjustments they could make that could change their dynamic going forward this season. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Looking forward to more. I got a fun guest lined up for you all on Wednesday's show. And then we'll get you, of course, ready for that game against the Pilots on Saturday. Going to be in the house for that one again, so come say hi if you're at the Chiles Center. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, go Zags.